Thank you, thank you. The following is one of my voiceover demos. If you're a voiceover artist and you would like to advertise one of your demos on my podcast, please send an MP3 to thedrill12, all one word, at gmail.com. That's thedrill12 at gmail.com. Back in a minute.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Caesar's Palace for 12 rounds of boxing. In the red corner, from Los Angeles, California, wearing the red trunks with the gold trim, weighing in at 125 pounds, the lightweight champion of the world, Danny Little Red Lopez. Well, Bill, our winners get a home theater receiver. That's right. Experience the full potential of high-definition video with this 72-channel digital home theater receiver from Yamaha. But wait, that's not all. They also get a 5.1-channel surround sound system from Mirage. With 5 palm-sized speakers and a compact subwoofer cube, the MX 5.1 brings you huge immersive sound with Mirage's omnipolar technology. All from the Spiegel catalog, Chicago, Illinois, 60609. And they're taking closer order as down the stretch they come. Mr. Hot Stuff has 3 lengths to make up with chocolate candy last. On the rail, take the points behind that gallant son with chocolate candy gaining on the outside. In the lead is Pioneer of the Nile being tackled by chocolate candy. They're neck and neck as they come to the wire. And Pioneer of the Nile holds off chocolate candy and wins the Santa Anita Derby. And now, on your feet, time to greet holder of 14 NBA titles, your home team, your Los Angeles Lakers. Number 3 at 6'8", 5th year out of UCLA, playing forward, Trevor Ariza. Starting at center, number 17 at 7 feet, 4th year out of St. Andrews High School, Andrew Bynum. And at guard, number 24, 6'6", 13th season out of Loyal Marion High School, Kobe Bryant.
Best job I ever had was working in the cleaners. That was a good job. I cried like a bitch when they fired me. They fired me for wearing other people's clothes. I be at the club like, women be saying, Earthquake always got something new on. I never see him in the same outfit. Sometimes he changed clothes at the club. My boy like, let me wear that shirt. I say, I would, dog, but he coming to pick it up tomorrow. Dude brought in a leather coat. When it be ready? I said, the summertime. Take 6 months to clean this jacket. Best job I ever had was working in the cleaner.
Good morning. It's Saturday, Speechless Saturday, July the 27th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have no free lunch, rules for radical conservatives, rules for patriots, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, the 33 Strategies of War, and Speechless. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
When World War II was over, Uncle Sam said, boys, go home. No one had to twist my arm. I came back across the foam. Now things are in a mess again. The world is all agog. Old Joe Stalin in Moscow's eating too high on the hog. Mr. Stalin, you're eating too high on the hog. Mr. Stalin, quit feeding those lies to your mob. Now, Joe, you'd better change your way, or like Hitler, you will pay for eating too high on the hog. Joe's getting up in age, but they say he ain't so dumb. He knows all about ships and tanks and maybe atom bombs. If he keeps eating like he is, at his own discretion, one of these days he's gonna wake up with American indigestion. Mr. Stalin, you're eating too high on the hog. Mr. Stalin, quit feeding those lies to your mob. We know that you've got armies, and we know that they're big, but don't forget the ham is close to the tail end of the pig. Office boys, they came to the UN and made a lot of noise. They're only taking orders that come across from you, but your hammer and sickle just won't fit our red, white, and blue. Mr. Stalin, you're eating too high on the hog. Mr. Stalin, quit feeding those lies to your mob. Now listen, Joe, you know that you aren't used to eating meat. Act your age, be yourself, stick to Kremlin wheat. Mr. Stalin, you're eating too high on the hog. Mr. Stalin, quit feeding those lies to your mob. Now, we aren't hunting trouble, but we ain't never run. Let's all live and let live, Joe. Remember the rising sun? Quit eating too high on the hog.
Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David Bahnsen.
There is a strange split in thinking common to those on the religious left, who are quick to denounce the profit motive and commercialism. Yet they seem to think that the key to happiness is giving people more stuff by enlisting the coercive power of government. This perverse way of thinking holds that social justice demands that we take money from those who have earned it and give it to those who have less of it. That's not social justice. That's materialism. Father Robert Sirico. This ought to be one of the primary arguments of defenders of a market economy, that our system seeks to create more fulfilled humans through a process of earned success, and the contrary systems are materialistic to the core. One system is focused on human achievement and flourishing. The other wants to merely give physical things to someone.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for radical conservatives.
Rule number 5. Let the dismantling begin. As is well known, is my dad's favorite newspaper, Pravda, or was it his Vestu? I can't remember, it's all Cyrillic to me, used to say, one of the dirtiest words in a fellow traveler's vocabulary is revanchist. You could look it up. The meaning, I mean, not the fact that it is one of our dirtiest words, right alongside America, religion, and the Constitution. But why bother? Revanchist means a backslider, a counter-revolutionary, the guy who wants to overthrow the overthrowers, someone out for a payback. In other words, you, if you're doing it right. And this is where we have always had you Knights of Columbus clods at a disadvantage. Given the nature of the game, it is always we who are the heroic ones, the fighters, the revolutionaries, the progressives, the people demanding change for the betterment of all mankind, or at least ourselves. Whereas you are the bad guys, the Basil Rathbone character in Robin Hood, the sneering scions of privilege who were standing in the schoolhouse door crying stop to the great forward march of progress. No wonder everybody hates you, including you. You see, there's nothing romantic or glamorous about being a conservative. Aside from occasionally polishing the bust of Edmund Burke, there's no great cause to serve, no glory to be won, no chicks to impress. There's absolutely nothing about it that fires the hearts, minds, and gonads of young people. No La Causa to Viva, no Finland Station train, no long march. Where's your slogan to compete with, say, the people united will never be defeated? Morning in America? What you need, my pathetic friends, is a cause, and that's what I'm here to give you in this section. Ask yourselves this simple question. What is it about revolutions that gets young Westerners all wee-weed up? It's not the food or the sleeping conditions or the occasional tear-gassing. It's not the Lincoln Brigade stories around the campfire, or the sweet young thing willing to share your sleeping bag, or the feel of cold steel up against your rib cage. Hell, it's not even the ultimate victory. After all, The Who taught my dad's generation that the new boss would be pretty much identical to the old boss. So the whole thing really didn't end up amounting to a hill of beans in this crazy world. It's destruction. We've been selling that since the Vandals or whoever sacked Rome, since the Turks took Constantinople, since the Brits burned Washington during the War of 18-whatever, since the Nazis tossed all those books on the great bonfires of the European vanities, since the Russians rolled through Berlin and just about blew away every man, woman, child, dog, cat, horse building and beer hall they could get their hands on. Fact is, we love to blow stuff up, especially when it's your stuff. And the longer and harder you worked at it, the more it means, the more cultural freight it carries, the sky higher we want to send it. And that's basically all there is to it. So get busy wrecking stuff. Only this time, it's our stuff you'll be wrecking. Turnabout is fair play. And for the first time in eons, you guys will be the Visigoths and we'll be the effete Romans, still searching for the perfect rhyme in a language nobody speaks anymore, while the raping and the looting were going on behind them. Part of the fun, of course, is you get to hear us squeal. And that ought to be sweet music to your ears after all these years of having to take it from us. Indeed, make destruction your campaign slogan. Roll it back. Get those clean-cut young military officers out there on the hustlings with a vow not simply to restore the status quo ante, but to revel in the destruction. Describe lovingly how each brick is going to be taken down. Each monstrous agency of the federal government, a government that by now pretty much everybody hates, even us, is going to be cut down to size or eliminated altogether. How lazy, shiftless bureaucrats who make twice what you do are going to be deunionized, forced to actually work in the dismantling of their own agencies, of their own jobs, and then summarily and publicly fired. How budgets will be first slashed and then eliminated entirely. How excess government property will be closed down and auctioned off. How taxes will be drastically reduced on the productive class and increased on the freeloading class. You know, the 47% of all taxpayers who today pay not one dime in federal income taxes. You want to be a part of this country, you got to pay something. As Blake, the Alec Baldwin character, says to a bunch of schmuck loser real estate hustlers in the film version of Mamet's masterpiece, Glengarry Glen Ross, it's fuck or walk. Here's the best part. The way you're going to sell this. You're not just tearing stuff down and blowing shit up for the fun of it, the way we do, and the way history's first rebel, Satan, tried to do in heaven. Oh no. You're tearing down the walls of the socialist prison we've been building around you. You're not destroyers, you're liberators. Just like we were back in 1968.
And that was the part of Chapter 24, beginning of Chapter 24, from Rules for Radical Conservatives by David Kahane. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Rules for Patriots.
Chapter 12, Conclusion. For a while now, you've suspected your wife hasn't been telling you everything. She's always cared about her appearance, but lately she's been piling on the makeup like she hasn't since you were dating. She showers a lot and takes longer lunches. Her text message alerts on her phone go off, prompting her to giggle and blush. You ask her what's up. Oh, just a friend saying something funny, she says. You even hear her mumbling another man's name in her dreams at night. You know in your gut something is amiss. You suspect a betrayal is happening right under your very nose, but you have loyalty to this relationship. Not to mention the fact you don't want to be made to look the fool, and you're scared of what the end game is should your suspicions prove to be true. This has been the only life you've ever known. If you confront her and she doesn't want to work through the situation, can you handle living life alone? Are you really going to start dating all over again? Will you ever be able to trust again, even if you were? Not yet ready to wrestle with those questions, you decide to punt and kick the can down the road for now. Essentially, you decide you would prefer to live a lie rather than confront the potential truth. Weeks go by and you pretend to be blissfully ignorant, but in the back of your mind, the lack of intimacy between you and your wife is starting to really gnaw at you, especially since you're pretty convinced another man is rubbing your rhubarb. But again, the thought of confronting the truth is just too painful. Until one day, you come home from work early, and there's a strange car in your driveway. You unlock the front door and are greeted with awkward noises and moaning coming from upstairs. Your instincts have you climbing the stairs to see what's going on when you really don't want to know. The front door to your bedroom is wide open. You reach the top of the stairs and peek through the doorway, only to witness your wife carrying on with another man in the middle of the day in your own bed. Shattered, you say not a word as you descend to the bottom of the stairs. You walk into the family room, looking out the window, pondering your next move. Emotionally, you're a mixture of anger, revolt, and defeat. All of a sudden, you hear the refrigerator door open in the kitchen. But before you walk over to see who it is, you are confronted with the image of a naked man drinking one of your favorite beverages, walking right past you like it's nobody's business. He doesn't even acknowledge you're there, while he sits down in your recliner and leans back to bring the footrest up. He says not a word until he brazenly asks you, "Hey man, do you know where the remote control is?" This is the point of no return grassroots patriots have reached with the current leadership of the Republican Party. Ronald Reagan once famously said, "I didn't leave the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party left me." These days, millions of grassroots patriots around the country feel the same about a Republican Party seemingly hell-bent on abandoning every principle other than crony capitalism. Recently on Fox News, conservative rock star Sarah Palin channeled that frustration when she said, quote, "I love the name of a third party, Freedom Party, and if the GOP continues to back away from the planks in our platform, from the principles that built this party of Lincoln and Reagan, then yeah, more and more of us are going to start saying, you know what? What's wrong with being independent? Kind of with that libertarian streak that much of us have. In other words, we want government to back off and not infringe on our rights. I think there will be a lot of us who start saying, GOP, if you abandon us, we have nowhere else to go except to become more independent and not enlist in one or the other of the private majority parties that rule in our nation, either a Democrat or a Republican. Remember, these are private parties, and you know, no one forces us to be enlisted in either party." Whenever I'm asked about this, and I'm asked about this a lot, I usually say, I'd like to try a second party before thinking about a third one. Venting frustration is one thing. Acting upon it is entirely another. When we're frustrated, there are plenty of things we can justify as a response, but many of those things aren't necessarily prudent. That's why we have the saying, cooler heads prevailed. On the other hand, there is certainly a time and a place to fashion a whip of cords or grab the jawbone of an ass and give him your best Howard Beale. So is it time for us to abandon the GOP or continue to try and reform it? Let's do a cost-benefit analysis before deciding. Number 1, the vision. Here's the cost. With the light of liberty barely a flicker, the absolute worst use of time for conservatives would be essentially starting over to form a third-party movement that may take decades to realize. Given how much freedom, liberty, and morality we've lost, our constitutional republic probably doesn't have decades. We need to do as much good as we can, and we need to do it right now. Benefit. Loyalty to the Republican Party has done nothing to squelch our slouch towards Gomorrah or statism. We've wasted years as it is, propping up neo-statists and gutless rhinos with little to nothing to show for it. Instead of wasting more time on the rotting corpse that is the GOP, better to get to work now on what will inevitably take its place. Short-term thinking is what got us here in the first place. Number 2, political impact. Here's the cost. Leaving the Republican Party would essentially hand almost every election of consequence to the Democrats for the foreseeable future and render conservatives meaningless in the grand scheme of things. Furthermore, if no longer held accountable by conservatives, you'll likely see the Republican Party ruling class openly conspire now with Democrats to continue to grow government, which means liberty will be lost even quicker. This rash move would take us quicker to irrelevancy. Benefit. The Republican Party ruling class is already conspiring with Democrats to grow government, despite our presence. In 2013, they passed the largest tax increase of 20 years. That's just one example. At least if we're no longer covering for these sellouts, we can recover some integrity lost by associating with the tarnished GOP brand and perhaps have an honest conversation with the American people about where we're headed for once. By forming a third party, we become de facto independents, and instead of being taken for granted, we become a crucial swing vote. Number 3, organization. Cost. Sure, there are days when the idea of bolting the GOP sounds great, but it's not feasible. The two most viable right-of-center third parties, the Libertarian and Constitution parties, still don't have consistent ballot access in all 50 states. Good luck recruiting candidates without ballot access. Good luck raising money without candidates. And good luck moving your agenda without money. The reality is the two dominant parties have made this kind of effort almost impossible without unprecedented fundraising / legal effort to build up to it. I don't like it. I wish that weren't the case. But it is what it is. Benefit. That was the same argument used against our founding fathers when they wanted to declare their independence. If there's anything American history has taught us, it's that when we step out on faith and principle, Providence handles the rest. One great way to ignite such an effort is to have leaders with the charisma, vision, and integrity lead the way in inspiring others to act on the courage of their convictions. Maybe some of those leaders will emerge if we step out on faith. Founding fathers like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson became the men we know them as today because they rose to the occasion when history needed them. Number 4, the future. Here's the cost. Most of us would agree the party is broken, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater here. The brokenness of the party reflects the cultural brokenness of the times in which we live. All private organizations are only as good as the people inhabiting them. Any new organization will eventually just develop the same problems that GOP has now. You can't expect a political party to have more moral purity than the culture as a whole. Still, reform is necessary. Instead of reinventing the wheel, why not encourage members of the Constitution and Libertarian parties to infiltrate the GOP? Many local and state Republican Party organizations across the country are in dire need of people. Who says those people can't be people of principle? Let's do to the GOP from the bottom up what the progressives already did to the Democrat Party. There's no reason we can't overrun the party's infrastructure and put our own people in there. Benefit. Some libertarians tried this, and look what the party bosses did to them at the Rules Committee meeting prior to the 2012 convention in Tampa. That was Soviet-style politics. Of course, you can't expect a private organization to be more righteous than the culture, but that actually proves my point. We are aligned with people who don't share our moral value system and have proven they will do things to beat us they would never do to Democrats. And they'll even use Fox News and other conservative media to do it. The time, talent, and treasure wasted on reforming the GOP is like trying to funnel foreign aid for the hungry through a corrupt local warlord. Whatever we send just ends up in his pocket. Let's face it, this whole debate is moot anyway, because the party bosses are in the process of betraying us first. Thus, the longer we wait, the harder it will be to do what we'll eventually have to go ahead and do anyway. Now that you've had a chance to weigh the pros and cons of each side of this argument, it's time for you to decide. I don't know about you, but I don't think this is a clear-cut call. In fact, I see compelling arguments of evidence on both sides. But what if I told you that you may not have to choose? That you might be able to have what amounts to a third party without starting completely over and losing the ground you've already taken? When I pitched the idea of this book to some friends of mine, they were concerned that the other side would read it and then know our playbook and use it against us. But I explained to them that's not possible, because this attack plan only works with our worldview. The reason you don't see too many Republican leaders using these 10 commandments of political warfare, and we've had to cite several of the same names over and over again as examples of Republicans that do, is because most Republican leaders can't use them. They don't have the worldview to use them, so it wouldn't work for them even if they tried. They'd simply be exposed as posers. For these tactics only work for those with conviction. Thus, they have to resort to tactics that look more in line with what the left does than what you just read in this book. If they ever actually deploy any tactics at all, that is, Most of the time, they don't even do that. They simply wait until their soulless consultants, who are usually dumber than they are, tell them what to think. If you put the commandments in this book to practical use wherever you have influence, you're going to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff real quick like. Whether that's at your state legislature, a town hall hosted by your congressman who's home for recess, your local state party, when you're running for office, or even casual conversation among friends and families. That's one of the things these commandments are meant to do. Here's another thing. For too long, we have mistaken friendlies for friends. Friendlies are people you can align with on a temporary basis when your vested interests are mutual. But those aren't long-lasting relationships. As circumstances change, your friendlies can become your enemies once your vested interests no longer intersect. Now, friends stick closer than a brother. Friends get in a foxhole with you. Friends have your back when the going gets tough. Friends share your convictions and mission. And although at times you may disagree on how best to carry it out, you're both aiming for the same end goal. Most of the Republican leaders we have aligned ourselves with are friendlies, but they are not our friends. This explains why at the time they seem so right on, and at other times so far off. They're so right on when we have mutually beneficial vested interests, and so far off when we don't. Sometimes they'll shield us from the firing squad aiming for us, and then sometimes they'll join it. If they were friends, they'd have the same angst and sense of urgency for our civilization's future that we have. They wouldn't need prodding or pressure to take a stand. We wouldn't have to worry about what will happen the minute we stop hounding them to do the right thing. Increasingly, our friendlies have become less and less friendly. But instead of letting our friendlies use us, why don't we use them? Children see things in extremes, but adults draw distinctions. We need to stop having a childlike relationship with the GOP, where we rely on the party to save America and treat its big names like our favorite athletes. Hey, I'll trade you a Marco Rubio rookie card for a Paul Ryan All-Star. How ridiculous does that sound? Yet, that's often how we've behaved. Political parties prey on that sort of cult of personality, and they encourage it, for it means politics becomes about personalities, not about principles. Personalities are much easier to manipulate. Principled leadership comes with a cost and often requires sacrifices like lives, fortunes, and sacred honor that a ruling class would prefer not to make. Here's my big idea. We don't owe this party any loyalty. I repeat, we don't owe this party any loyalty. One more time, in case you missed it. We don't owe this party any loyalty. They owe us. There would have never been a Reagan era to wax nostalgic about if it weren't for us. The Republican Party was going nowhere fast after the Watergate era until the birth of the conservative movement. The Republican victories of 2010 were done in spite of the party. They didn't want champions like Ted Cruz, remember? We had to drag them kicking and screaming into the winner's circle. The Republican Party didn't make us. We made them. We don't take the orders around here. We give them. Or at least we ought to be. We don't take any sanctimonious lectures from our employees about how half a loaf is better than none or the lesser of two evils. We run the show. So we determine what the acceptable standard is, who met that standard, and how to hold them accountable when they don't meet it. I no longer feel a compulsion to vote for every Republican opposite every Democrat, and I haven't voted straight ticket Republican in years. I came to realize that's the coward's way out. Doesn't mean I'm voting for Democrats, but it does mean I'm also no longer voting for Democrats calling themselves Republicans. But Steve, some of you will say, at least a bad Republican is better than a good Democrat. Now you haven't realized that a bad Republican and a good Democrat are one and the same. Immediately go back to page 1 and start rereading the book. But Steve, some of you will say, in our system majority rules, so even a bad Republican will still vote Republican for leadership positions. So what? Why in the Sam Hill should I care if John Boehner or Nancy Pelosi is Speaker of the House? Not once, not twice, not thrice, but 4 times in 2013, Boehner allowed bills to pass out of the House of Representatives a majority of Republicans didn't vote for. 2 of those were the largest tax increase in the last 20 years and the largest tax increase of all time, Obamacare. So what's the point of having a majority then? At least when Pelosi is giving us failed policies and statism, I can blame it on her and the Democrats, and then recruit good candidates to challenge them in the next election. Bad Republicans are actually worse than Democrats in that respect because they depress the conservative base and make it harder to get our people engaged. Think about it. Are you more eager to take on the perp who breaks into your house and threatens your loyal and loving wife, or the disloyal wife you found out was cheating on you? One situation spurs you to act on your God-given masculine instinct. The other rips your still beating heart from your chest and demoralizes you. I agree success in our system is based on building coalitions, but those have to be coalitions of the willing. What is the point in giving Ditch McConnell or Lindsey Grahamnesty another 6 years in the United States Senate? Why would I align myself, even temporarily, with someone who has more in common with Democrats than with me, especially when they come from red states like Kentucky and South Carolina? Who cares if the Democrat wins in those sorts of places? Because they'll be easier to beat in the next election in those states. But let a Republican like Ditch McConnell become an entrenched incumbent, and you'll suffer under his gangster government for decades. See, adults don't need instant gratification. Children do. Adults put off instant gratification because they see the bigger picture. Children get emotionally manipulated to act upon what's best right now, without any perspective. Granted, if a Scott Brown is the best you can do in the bluest of blue states like Massachusetts, so be it. But as groups like Club for Growth and Madison Project point out, there's no reason not to have a real conservative as the senator to every red state and the congressman to every red district. I say we start building from there, and then it's easier to keep the squishes of the world like Scott Brown in line once elected, when they're surrounded by a caucus led by the likes of Ted Cruz and not Ditch McConnell. There are some simple, notice I didn't say easy, steps to actually forging a real opposition party in America again. Before making the decades-long investment in a viable third party, why not try this? We don't have to be mascots for the GOP, but simply use the GOP as a means to an end when it suits us. I'm not talking about reforming the Republican Party, because it's well beyond that now. I'm talking about essentially running a party within a party, and using them the way they've used us for years. And only on our terms. Stop treating the GOP like a religious cult. Let's reevaluate our relationship with the party and make it less personal and more businesslike. When your employees don't do the job you hired them to do, you don't feel emotionally betrayed and then close up shop. No, you simply fire them and get better employees. This party isn't deserving of our emotions, nor is it worth the salt in our tears. And no political party ever has been. No matter where we go or what we build, we'll eventually manifest the same problems. Trust me, I'm an evangelical. We break up churches and start new denominations all the time, believing that this time we'll get it right. But we forget the problem is ultimately us. Someone once asked G.K. Chesterton, "What's wrong with the world?" He gave them a one-word answer: me. Our nature is fallen, as is all of creation. The Republican Party, or any organization or institution for that matter, is only as good as the people inhabiting it. When we turn a political party into a church and politicians into angels/demigods, we're asking for the very same disappointment we have received. Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar, and render unto God that which is God's. Do not give Caesar your conscience or virtue. That belongs to God. When Caesar demands either, he's demanding you recognize him as God, and we should have a simple answer for that. No. We don't contort our moral values into a pretzel to justify voting for another Republican hack. We demand that Republican hack meet our standard for hiring, or heaven hath no fury like the next primary cycle. Speaking of primaries, they are the most immediate route to move the country right. In many places, we in the grassroots outnumber the establishment. So as long as we actively and smartly participate in the primary process, replacing these Republicrats is not nearly as hard as we've been led to believe. But for too long, we have ignored the primary process at our own peril. So we're now at the point that the primary really is the election. For if the wrong kind of Republican wins the primary, the general election becomes a moot point. If you're aligned with a conservative or libertarian organization that isn't willing to take a strong and public stand in primaries, get out now. More than likely, they are little more than caretakers for the ruling class, running their own shadow incumbent protection program. Primaries separate the men from the boys. Primaries tell us who's here to really take on the system and who's here to be a part of the system. Seriously, I think if we just did those two things, stopped being partisan loyalists and started participating in primaries en masse, we'd be amazed at how much positive change we could see based off that alone. And that's something you can do even if you want to belong to a third party and not be a full-time Republican. Many states allow you to vote in open primaries or register on the same day as the event. Why not go in, vote for the best constitutional conservative on the ballot, and then get back out if you want? Barack Obama is correct about one thing. We are the people we've been waiting for. Change for the better is not going to come from the top down beginning in Washington, D.C. Change is only going to come from the bottom up when we in the grassroots get mad enough to make it happen. Get mad. Stay mad. Now in your anger, we do not sin. But anger can be a powerful and virtuous motivator when under control. Like when a mama grizzly is angry that a predator threatens her babies. Like when a father is angry that a perpetrator threatens his family. Like when a loving but holy God is angry at what sin has done to his creation. The system is counting on our complacency. And if we're being honest, we have to admit to ourselves, it has every reason to. But we've always been the ones in charge. We've always outnumbered them. We've just been unwilling to act like it. Now is the time for that action. The clock is ticking on these United States of America. The last best hope for human freedom this side of Eden is on the brink of becoming a footnote in human history. Do you want to be the generation that has to look our children in the eye and explain why liberty died? Not on my watch. Who's with me? This has been...
And that was Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again by Steve Deese. And as I've said before, these are some good ideas and rules for politics. And one of the things that when he was talking that it reminded me of is, well, how do you deal with a lot of this? For instance, the minority leader in the Senate who is from Kentucky. I can't vote him out. I don't live in Kentucky. The vast majority of us don't live in Kentucky, so we can't vote him out. But what we can do is we can go to the talk show hosts, to the Sean Hannitys of the world, and demand that if people in office holders want airtime, that they have to pay for it. Pay for the airtime, because Mitch McConnell has millions of dollars in his war chest. Okay, if Sean Hannity's going to give free airtime to anybody, he must give it to challengers. And what he should be doing every day, every single day he's on the air, he should be saying, if there's a challenger to Mitch McConnell, you give me a call, I will give you all the free airtime you want and need. Okay, now I understand he doesn't do that for two reasons. Number one is money and the other is prestige, but he's just going to have to suck it up. If he expects things to get better, if he expects to have improvements so that we don't have a bunch of fucking rhinos running things, people that really don't give a rat's ass about this country and only care about their political future and about how much money they got in their bank account, then we have to take action like that. We have to have a competitive environment. It's ironic that the Democrats say that we have to have competition, that the essence of capitalism, the essence of business is competition. It isn't. It's contract formation. But we'll pretend that they're right for a few seconds. They say it's they say it is about competition. Well, if competition is important in business, it's absolutely vital in politics, especially in a constitutional republic, in a free society. Think about it. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the Daily Stoic.
The only prize. What's left to be prized? This, I think, to limit our action or inaction to only what's in keeping with the needs of our own preparation. It's what the exertions of education and teaching are all about. Here is the thing to be prized. If you hold this firmly, you'll stop trying to get yourself all the other things. If you don't, you won't be free, self-sufficient, or liberated from passion, but necessarily full of envy, jealousy, and suspicion for any who have the power to take them. And you'll plot against those who do have what you prize. But by having some self-respect for your own mind and prizing it, you will please yourself and be in better harmony with your fellow human beings, and more in tune with the gods, praising everything they have set in order and allotted you. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations, 6.16.2b through 4a. Warren Buffett, whose net worth is approximately $65 billion, lives in the same house he bought in 1958 for $31,500. John Urschel, a lineman for the Baltimore Ravens, makes millions, but manages to live on $25,000 a year. San Antonio Spurs star Kawhi Leonard gets around in the 1997 Chevy Tahoe he's had since he was a teenager, even with a contract worth some $94 million. Why? It's not because these men are cheap. It's because the things that matter to them are cheap. Neither Buffett nor Urschel nor Leonard ended up this way by accident. Their lifestyle is the result of prioritizing. They cultivate interests that are decidedly below their financial means, and as a result, any income would allow them freedom to pursue the things they most care about. It just happens that they became wealthy beyond any expectation. This kind of clarity about what they love most in the world means they can enjoy their lives. It means they'd still be happy even if the markets were to turn or their careers were cut short by injury. The more things we desire and the more we have to do to earn or attain those achievements, the less we actually enjoy our lives and the less free we are.
And that was the Daily Stoic. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Bishop Robert Barron.
The fruit of silence is prayer. The fruit of prayer is faith. The fruit of faith is love. The fruit of love is service. The fruit of service is peace. Peace, right? That's the thing we all want. Everybody in this world. That's what we all want. But you've got to begin with silence. Look, I'm kind of a driven person. You got to accomplish something and do, go. And okay, that's good as far as it goes. But the real joy comes when we can sit quietly, silently, and savor. Do we take the time to do that? To waste time with God. I love that definition of prayer, by the way. How do we hear Him? By making silent our own voice, our own minds, our own worries, our own preoccupations. Silence that. And what rises in our heart is the voice of the Lord.
And that was Bishop Robert Barron. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, the 33 Strategies of War.
Reversal. Even as you plan your communications to make them more consciously strategic, you must develop the reverse ability to decode the subtexts, hidden messages, and unconscious signals in what other people say. When people speak in vague generalities, for example, and use a lot of abstract terms like justice, morality, liberty, and so on, without really ever explaining the specifics of what they're talking about, they are almost always hiding something. This is often their own nasty but necessary actions, which they prefer to cover up under a screen of righteous verbiage. When you hear such talk, be suspicious. Meanwhile, people who use cutesy colloquial language, brimming with cliches and slang, may be trying to distract you from the thinness of their ideas, trying to win you over not by the soundness of their arguments, but by making you feel chummy and warm toward them. And people who use pretentious, flowery language crammed with clever metaphors are often more interested in the sound of their own voices than in reaching the audience with a genuine thought. In general, you must pay attention to the forms in which people express themselves. Never take their content at face value.
And that was the 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene. Back in a minute. Thank you. So if you're a Democrat, you should vote Republican because there are things that don't disappear. Violence is one of them. Modernity is not distinguished by an aversion to violence. Violence is simply protean. It varies its outward form according to the social constellation at hand. Today, it is shifting from the visible to the invisible, from the frontal to the viral, from brute force to mediated force, from the real to the virtual, from the physical to the psychological, from the negative to the positive, withdrawing into the subcutaneous, subcommunicative, capillary, and neuronal space, creating the false impression that it has disappeared. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, "A full, perfect system of capitalism has never yet existed in history. Various degrees of government intervention and control remained in all the mixed, semi-free economies of the 19th century, undercutting, hampering, distorting, and ultimately destroying the operation of a free market. But during the 19th century, mankind came close to economic freedom for the first and only time in history. Observe the results. Observe also that the degree of a country's freedom from government control was the degree of its progress. America was the freest and achieved the most." Unquote. Ayn Rand, The Intellectual Bankruptcy of Our Age, from The Voice of Reason. Back in a minute. Thank you. So this is Maria Bartiromo on today on Saturday, and she has a guest, and they're talking about Vice President Harris's progressive proposals.
Past, the vice president pushed for increased taxes across the board to pay for progressive programs such as Medicare for All. This includes bumping capital gains tax 35%, increasing the estate tax. If Harris is able to secure the presidency and implement any of these policies, what impact could it have on the economy and middle-class Americans? Joining me now, Americans for Tax Reform President Grover Norquist. Grover, thanks very much for joining us this weekend. What kind of proposals are you expecting from Kamala Harris, and what kind of an impact might you expect?
There we go. Okay, so this is she approaches this all wrong. This is the way the left likes to play the game, because this is the only way they can win. Normally, the way it works in a normal society, we make the presumption for the status quo. So that means we assume that the tax levels that we have currently are fine the way they are, and that if somebody wants to raise or lower those tax rates, then the burden of proof is on them to prove that the raising or lowering of those tax rates would benefit our society. What's happening here is she is asking her guest to explain why it is that these tax increases should not occur. So let's listen to his response.
She has a series of tax increases, many of them much worse, more radical, more devastating to the economy than even what Biden put forward. The Biden administration, along with Kamala, came out for a capital gains tax of 44.6%. 44.6%. Twice China's. Who's going to invest in the United States if Kamala and Biden got their way on that one?
So, and then he goes on to, again, more this percentage, that percentage, who's going to want to invest, who's going to want to invest. And so what he's trying to do is prove that these policies would be destructive, but he can't. You can't prove a negative. You can't prove something shouldn't happen. You can't prove that why a change should not occur, or that a change should not occur. You can't do it. It's impossible. What is possible is to prove that a change should occur. And again, that's the burden is on her. What he should have said was, I can't answer that question, Maria. It is up to, and it's not up to me. The burden of proof isn't on me. It's on Kamala Harris. Because Kamala Harris just comes out and says, we should have Medicare for all. But she doesn't explain why. She acts as though it's a self-evident primary. And it's not. It's a conclusion. And so she based that conclusion on whatever facts that she's gathered. She needs to promote her policies instead of making the statement and then daring people to oppose it. Now, as far as being impossible to prove, he comes out and he says, well, this rate would be higher than China's. Let's assume that that's absolutely correct. Why would anybody want to invest in the United States? We don't know. The fact of the matter is that the only way we can find out whether or not his predictions are accurate is if we go ahead and institute the tax policy and find out. See what I mean? So this is why you can't prove it. You're going to have to implement the change to be able to prove that the change is no good. But once the change is implemented, then it becomes part of the status quo. Now, if you want to go back to the way things were before, you have the burden of proof to prove that we should go back. So you have the burden of proof initially, the burden of proof on the back end, and in the meantime, Kamala Harris and people like Kamala Harris just sit back and enjoy the ride. Shouldn't be that way, and it doesn't have to be that way. People that want change have the burden of proof. Back in a minute. Thank you. So the Olympics, there's a Last Supper. Apparently, I don't know where it's located in Paris, but I don't know. It's just an abomination of the Last Supper, and there's a lot of people, of course, that are upset about it, rightfully so. But the reason this is happening, and that's what everybody's missing, why is this happening? Simple, because decades ago, back in the 70s, somebody decided that history is politics. History is nothing but propaganda. They said that history is written by the winners. And there was nobody on the right, no conservatives, chief among them William F. Buckley Jr., to push back. William F. Buckley Jr. said that the role of conservatism and conservatives was to stand athwart history and yell, "Stop." I don't know where the hell he was. He must have been sitting around with his thumb up his ass and his brains in neutral, because he did nothing about this. And this is what has undermined everything in our society, turned everything in our society into politics, including religion. Because you see, everything has a history. Everything. Religion has a history. Mathematics has a history. The English language has a history. So if history is all propaganda, then it's wide open and fair game for other propagandists to get involved. And that's what's happened here. Left-wing propagandists have created their own version of the Last Supper. If we want to end this, we need to fight back by saying, no, history was not written by the winners. It was written by the historians. Okay, and if we do that, and all academics, all people that are like the guy that runs Hillsdale College, Larry Ayn, he should be chief among them, out going everywhere he possibly can and preaching the gospel of history, which is history's written by the historians, and the historians must have integrity or credibility, or no one will take them seriously, and their careers are ruined. So no, history's not written by the winners, it's written by the historians. And once we start getting that back on track, all this kind of stuff you're seeing in Paris is going to go away. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, from Speechless by Michael Knowles, Controlling Words and Controlling Minds, Chapter 8, The School of Resentment.
Chapter 8, The School of Resentment. Professor Harold Bloom's research assistant entered his office in distress. "Harold, I'm rather stunned," she began, shaking her head. "I've just gone to my undergraduate seminar in American Studies. We just had a lecture on Walt Whitman. The professor spent the entire 2 hours explaining to us that Walt Whitman was a racist." Bloom, the legendary liberal literary critic and defender of the Western canon, recounted the story the following year. "In the face of that, my dear, I almost lose my capacity for outrage, shock, or indignation," he told his interviewer. "Walt Whitman a racist? It is simply lunatic."
Had history taken a different course, radical academics might have exalted the homosexual and religious skeptic Whitman as a progressive hero. But Whitman loved his country. He began the second edition of Leaves of Grass by declaring, "The United States themselves are essentially the greatest poem." He earned the title America's Poet, and so American studies professors have to hate him. Virtually all the pseudo-academic disciplines that developed out of critical theory valorize their subjects. Black studies exalts black people, women's studies venerates women, and queer studies casts a sympathetic light on homosexuals. The exceptions are whiteness studies and American studies, which exist to deconstruct and denigrate white people and America, respectively. In fact, all the other critical studies denigrate America too. The nominal concern for one putative victim group or another serves merely as a lens through which to focus the broader project of criticizing America in particular and Western civilization more generally. Harold Bloom dubbed this pedagogical brood of vipers the School of Resentment. Before critical theory conquered the academy, readers approached texts in search of wisdom. Now, radical ideologues have driven the humility, curiosity, and love required for learning out of the classroom. They have replaced the traditional approach to teaching with a resentful attitude derived from critical theory that castigates authors and texts according to modern ideologies. This form of analysis often ignores the meaning of the text, instead imposing on it whatever faddish notion strikes the reader's fancy. Not even the superlative works of William Shakespeare can withstand the academic obsession with an author's race and sex. In 2016, a group of undergraduate barbarians petitioned Yale to decolonize its English department by lifting a requirement that students study Shakespeare and Chaucer, among other writers, in the university's major English poets course. It is unacceptable that a Yale student considering studying English literature might read only white male authors, reads the petition. The English department offered countless classes on non-white, non-male authors. But the possibility that an English major might focus more on Shakespeare's sonnets than slam poetry proved too much for the cultural revolutionaries, who demanded the right to earn an English degree without ever once reading the Bard. Major English poets included white male authors because the major English poets are white and male. In what world would the presence of English poets in a course on English poetry constitute colonization? Colonization means the sending in of settlers to establish political control over a territory. In the case of Yale's English department, the only colonizers are the student radicals themselves, whose political goal of cultural hegemony impels them to march on the established institutions and seize the means of cultivation. One doubts that the student radicals would protest a course on major Zulu poets because the curriculum comprised too many black male authors. In the School of Resentment, only the West must be deconstructed. New forms of literary analysis arose to dismiss the West's great intellectual discoveries as self-serving, socially contrived, and historically contingent. Deconstruction, post-structuralism, postmodernism, and many other pretentious academic movements proliferated throughout the academy during the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, all to the same political purpose. They sought to undermine the philosophical and cultural basis of Western civilization. In 1976, the French philosopher Jacques Derrida summed up the maddening technique of deconstruction in 6 words: "There is nothing outside the text." Derrida's critics and admirers have long debated the precise meaning of his cryptic statement, translated from the French, "Il n'y a pas de hors texte." Since rehashing these debates threatens even greater danger to brain cells than does his philosophy, the safest way to understand Derrida's meaning is by observing the consequences of his writing on the Western mind, now atrophied by generations of argle-bargle to the point of denying objective truth itself. No one denies that social and historical context can help a reader to interpret a text. But the deconstructionists' obsession with context, to the exclusion of absolute truth and objective knowledge, has had the ironic effect of depriving great works of their proper context. The puerile focus of the decolonizers on Shakespeare's genetics and genitals obscures the objective beauty of his poetry and the profundity of his observations about human nature. The radicals revel in castigating the Bard for his stereotypical portrayal of Shylock as a greedy Jew in The Merchant of Venice. But they never get around to praising his profound description of the quality of mercy that droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath, and becomes the throned monarch better than his crown, as an attribute to God himself. The radicals have no mercy on the West, which they unjustly blame for all the sins of mankind. But while conservatives mock the illogic of their theories, we might also acknowledge the perfect logic of their tactics. Shakespeare's works and the King James Bible have shaped the English-speaking peoples more than any other texts. A cursory glance at the Gettysburg Address, or Lincoln's second inaugural, reveals the extent to which those great works educated America's greatest orator, Abraham Lincoln. Shakespeare and the KJV in no small part wrought the Western mind. The cultural revolutionaries forced the Bible out of schools the decade before the School of Resentment began to poison American education. In 1963, in Abington School District versus Shemp, the Supreme Court discovered a theretofore hidden constitutional ban on biblical education in public schools. With the Bible thus vanquished, the radicals next set their sights on Shakespeare and the other great writers of the Western canon. They portrayed their campaign as an effort to expand the curriculum, to make it more open, liberal, and inclusive. But curricula cannot expand. There are only so many hours in the day, and students can only study so much in a semester. Every minute spent on one writer or work means a minute away from another. The revolutionaries did not seek to expand the curriculum, but rather to change it. They sought to remove focus from the great authors of the Western tradition in favor of newer and lesser writers selected along narrow ideological lines. Here again, conservatives have all too often fallen into the trap laid before them, responding to the cultural massacre with lame, liberal platitudes praising choice. Perhaps universities need not require that English majors read Shakespeare, they whimper, just so long as they have the choice. These meek concessions miss the point, just as do popular slogans distinguishing between education and indoctrination. Education, by its very nature, is coercive. University students may choose to study the lyrics of Cardi B rather than the works of Shakespeare, but once they have made that decision, free choice gives way to assignments, exams, and the threat of low grades. Does anyone believe that the radicals intend to leave the future of their ideological education program up to the free choice of students? Just as student demands in the 1960s for free speech led to the establishment of new politically correct speech codes, so too, campaigns to expand curricula in the 1970s led over the ensuing decades to the establishment of diversity requirements in course selection and even mandatory training sessions in politically correct ideology. Choice will not suffice to save the Western mind. Dithering conservatives must make choices themselves. Not only must they defend the cultural tradition that the revolutionaries ruthlessly and relentlessly criticize, but they must also actively oppose the radical curricula that those revolutionaries are installing in its place. Not only should universities teach classes on Shakespeare, but they should not offer courses on Cardi B, or underwater basket weaving, or lesbian dance theory, all of which have actually appeared in recent years at American universities. Such courses need not actively oppose the Western tradition to effect the radicals' goals. Whether subversive or merely frivolous, these courses waste students' time and keep them away from the great works that made the great culture now fading before our very eyes. Conservatives consider these radicals barbarians, but in many ways they understand culture better than we do. Rather than learning from leftists such as Gramsci and Marcuse, conservatives have dismissed them as kooks. But Marcuse was right to observe that tolerance necessarily involves limits, even if the limits he sought to impose repel all reasonable people. Gramsci offered keen insight into cultural hegemony, even as he tried to wrest it for the radicals. The revolutionaries understand the importance of language to culture, hence their focus on literary criticism within the university and on politically correct speech among the broader public. Once entrenched, these critical studies expanded their scope into virtually every academic discipline, from history to hard science. Leonard Jeffries, the founding chairman of the Black Studies Department at the City College of New York, provides a typically absurd glimpse into this sort of pseudo-scholarship. Beginning in 1972 and continuing throughout his 2-decade tenure in the classrooms of CUNY, Jeffries expounded on his theory that Africans constitute a superior race of sun people, in contrast to whites, who make up the inferior race of ice people. The black sun people, he explained, possess core spiritual values, unlike the materialistic ice people, who objectify everything they see, most notably the sun people, through slavery, because the ecology of the cave is different than the ecology of the riverbank. Readers who have followed the argument thus far might consider seeing a psychologist. In the summer of 2020, television personality Nick Cannon regurgitated Jeffries' theories for a new generation. During an episode of his podcast, Cannon's Class, the actor argued that melanated people possess compassion and souls, unlike white people who are actually closer to animals and are actually the true savages because they lack the power of the sun. This pigment deficiency means that the only way that they can act is evil, he explained. They have to rob, steal, rape, kill in order to survive. Jeffries couldn't have said it better himself. After decades of spouting this bilious nonsense, Jeffries crossed a line on July 20th, 1991, during a 2-hour-long speech at the Empire State Black Arts and Culture Festival, in which he blamed rich Jews for controlling Hollywood and financing the transatlantic slave trade. The New York Times and the Washington Post both rightly denounced him. But what took so long? As the Post reported at the time, Jeffries' race-baiting harangues have been a familiar part of CUNY life for years, and this has not prevented him from gaining both tenure and the chairmanship of his department, not to mention a following at City College as, in the Times' description, a popular, flamboyant lecturer. Jeffries festered at City College for 2 decades on the grounds that his dismissal would threaten academic freedom. Both conservatives and radicals exalt academic freedom, much as they do free speech and tolerance. But like free speech and tolerance, in practice, academic freedom only ever seems to cut one way. Respect for academic freedom kept Leonard Jeffries employed for decades, spewing barmy fantasies about sun people, ensoulment, and the ancient Egyptians. But academic freedom didn't keep conservative professor Peter Berkowitz employed at Harvard, or Carol Swain at Vanderbilt, or even the occasionally vaguely conservative liberal Erica Christakis at Yale. In 2007, Columbia University invited Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad to lecture in New York. Columbia defended its invitation to Ahmadinejad, who at the time was actively killing U.S. servicemen in Iraq, on the grounds of academic freedom. Protests took place around the campus, and Columbia's president opened the lecture by listing the Islamic leader's crimes. But still the university permitted the international terrorist to address a full auditorium, interrupted only by the applause of Ahmadinejad's supporters in the room. Ahmadinejad spent his lecture denying the existence of homosexuals in Iran and the historicity of the Holocaust. A decade later, when the Columbia University College Republicans invited the right-wing British activist Tommy Robinson to give a speech on the pitfalls of mass Islamic migration, the lecture met tougher resistance. Protesters stormed the lecture hall and shouted down the speaker. University officers barred attendees from entering the room. More protesters outside banged on the door so that the audience that had managed to enter could not hear. And Robinson himself was not even physically present. Instead, he addressed the group by video conference after the U.S. State Department, at the insistence of left-wing British legislators, refused to grant the speaker a visa to enter the country. If only Robinson had been an Islamic terrorist rather than a conservative critic of Islamic terror, perhaps he would have been afforded the academic freedom to give his lecture. Conservatives may condemn this sort of censorship and castigate leftists as hypocrites for abandoning their own avowed devotion to academic freedom when it suits their ideological ends. But the radicals understand the true nature of this slogan far better than their present-day conservative critics. Pure academic freedom, like pure free speech and tolerance, has never existed, nor can it. The ancient Athenians killed Socrates for corrupting the youth. The Catholic Church, which invented the university in the Middle Ages, exerted significant control over the boundaries of academic discourse, most notably in the case of Galileo Galilei. The modern notion of academic freedom began after the Protestant Revolution with the founding of the University of Leiden in 1575. Yet even the University of Leiden refused to grant absolute academic freedom, and the Protestant Synod of Dort in 1618 restricted this liberty even further in its efforts to stifle the spread of the Arminian heresy. In the 18th century, a handful of German universities attempted to establish relative academic freedom once again, but Napoleon reversed those efforts when he rose to power in the early 19th century. In 1636, the Great and General Court of the Massachusetts Bay Colony founded the College at Newtown, later renamed Harvard, but not with any notion of academic freedom. Rather, the court established Harvard to rid Newtown, later renamed Cambridge, of the antinomian heresy promoted by Anne Hutchinson, who was banished from the colony and later killed by Siwanoy Indians in New York. Even into the 20th century, the most ardent defenders of academic freedom insisted on limitations to that freedom. In 1940, the American Association of University Professors issued its Statement on Academic Freedom and Tenure, which reiterated similar professions made in 1915 and 1925. The AAUP endorsed the right of teachers to freedom in the classroom in discussing their subject. But in the very same sentence, it cautioned that educators should be careful not to introduce into their teaching controversial matter which has no relation to their subject, and later instructed them to exercise appropriate restraint. The broadest defense of academic freedom in modern history barred controversy and demanded restraint. Conservatives once understood the silliness of the academic freedom slogan. William F. Buckley Jr. launched both his career and the post-war conservative movement with a book inveighing against academic freedom, which he dismissed as a hoax. 21st century conservatives may remember the book's title, God and Man at Yale, but few seem to recall its subtitle, The Superstitions of Academic Freedom. All universities must have a mission, Buckley argued, so educators must structure their lectures toward advancing that mission and leave sermons that contradict it out of the classroom. Buckley attacked universities for justifying their godless and collectivist curricula on the basis of academic freedom over the objections of parents and alumni. In the last analysis, Buckley concluded, academic freedom must mean the freedom of men and women to supervise the educational activities and aims of the schools they oversee and support. While Buckley encouraged alumni to withhold donations until universities encouraged Christian morality and free market economics, present-day conservatives relegate themselves to making piddling pleas for intellectual diversity in the hope that radicals don't run them off campus altogether. Buckley's intellectual heirs have flipped his stance on academic freedom, which WFB's own magazine has recently defended in the very manner its founder mocked. Buckley, like Milton and Locke, has come to serve as a byword for ideas he never espoused and even denounced. But Buckley had it right. Universities educate, which means they necessarily encourage certain ideas and discourage others. Neutrality is an illusion. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Harvard continues to fight heresy today just as vigorously as it did in the 17th century. But today, political correctness rather than congregational Protestantism defines the university's orthodoxy. Benighted conservatives bewail this state of affairs, but education must have boundaries. Contrary to the popular and meaningless mantra that educators ought to teach students how to think, not what to think, education necessarily teaches certain facts to the exclusion or outright contradiction of others. The slogan actually disproves itself, as it tells people what to think about education. When a teacher informs his students that 2 + 2 make 4 rather than 5, he teaches them what to think. The student's grasp of basic arithmetic, in turn, teaches them how to think about more complex problems. The principle extends beyond mathematics. When a teacher in ethics or religion tells his students that it is wrong to steal or that it is wrong to commit murder, he teaches them what to think, and these lessons teach students how to think about other moral issues. So when a leftist instructor teaches that it is right to murder through abortion, when he teaches that it is right to steal through confiscatory public policy or even outright looting, he too teaches his students what to think. And this perverse moral education likewise shapes how they think about other questions, at grave cost to society. If conservatives hope to regain the political and cultural ground they have ceded over the past century, They must extricate themselves from the trap laid for them by radicals who have convinced conservatives to abandon all standards and substantive claims for an abstract ideal of openness that has never existed in practice. We cannot rest easy in the belief that the good, the true, and the beautiful will necessarily win out in the free marketplace of ideas, when the radicals regulate the market to subsidize the wicked, the false, and the ugly. The New York Times exemplified this ideological market distortion in 2020 when it set out to rewrite the history of the United States through the 1619 Project. The project, which took its name from the year in which the first slave ship arrived at the shores of Virginia, aimed to reframe the country's history by placing the consequences of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans at the very center of our national narrative. To lead the ambitious project, the Times tapped the left-wing journalist Nicole Hannah-Jones, who based her series of essays on a lie. Conveniently left out of our founding mythology, Hannah-Jones wrote, is the fact that one of the primary reasons the colonists decided to declare their independence from Britain was because they wanted to protect the institution of slavery. Hannah-Jones, who majored in history and African American studies, may have overheard this canard as she steeped in the school of resentment during her undergraduate years, but the claim has no basis in reality. Hanlon's razor impels us never to attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity, but whether through dishonesty or ignorance, the 1619 Project began with a lie. Not even left-wing historians could abide the deceit. Princeton historian Sean Wilentz drafted a letter signed by academic historians from around the country and sent it to the editors and publisher of the Times. The historians established their leftist credentials by beginning the letter with praise for the project. "We applaud all efforts to address the enduring centrality of slavery and racism to our history," they professed. "Raising profound, unsettling questions about slavery and the nation's past and present, as the 1619 Project does, is a praiseworthy and urgent public service," they continued. But finally, they came to their objection. The project got the central facts wrong. These errors, which concern major events, cannot be described as interpretation or framing, the historians explained. They are matters of verifiable fact, which are the foundation of both honest scholarship and honest journalism. If the naive historians were looking for either, they had come to the wrong place, but they nevertheless offered their correction, which merits quotation at length. On the American Revolution, pivotal to any account of our history, the project asserts that the founders declared the colony's independence of Britain in order to ensure slavery would continue. This is not true. If supportable, the allegation would be astounding. Yet every statement offered by the project to validate it is false. Some of the other material in the project is distorted, including the claim that, for the most part, Black Americans have fought their freedom struggles alone. Still other material is misleading. The project criticizes Abraham Lincoln's views on racial equality, but ignores his conviction that the Declaration of Independence proclaimed universal equality for blacks as well as whites, a view he upheld repeatedly against powerful white supremacists who opposed him. The project also ignores Lincoln's agreement with Frederick Douglass that the Constitution was, in Douglass's words, a glorious liberty document. Instead, the project asserts that the United States was founded on racial slavery, an argument rejected by a majority of abolitionists and proclaimed by champions of slavery like John C. Calhoun. The historian's critique reads like an usher at Ford's Theater asking, "Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how did you enjoy the play?" The entire 1619 Project hinges on the premise that our forebears founded the country to defend slavery. When the historians refuted that claim, the thesis fell apart. The Times persisted in error for a full 7 months before clarifying its central claim to read, "One of the primary reasons some of the colonists decided to declare their independence from Britain was because they wanted to protect the institution of slavery, a change that succeeded neither in admitting fault nor in salvaging the thesis." But the Times never needed to prove the thesis, only to popularize it, which the outlet spent a fortune doing. In the fall of 2019, the Times secretly spent $3 million on just 3 Facebook ads promoting the project, and an unknown amount more after that. While Facebook requires the buyers of ads about social issues, elections, or politics to make information about audience reach and ad spend available to the public, a requirement the New York Times demanded and praised, the Times itself skirted those rules by presenting their false, highly ideological revisionist history as objective journalism. Within a year, the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting had translated the project into a curriculum with lesson plans and reading guides, which promptly entered more than 3,500 classrooms around the country. The academic historians had complained that the project's lies suggest a displacement of historical understanding by ideology. But that was the point from the very beginning. The 1619 Project did not attempt to recover some hidden truth or refute some long-told lie, but rather to reframe American history itself. When did America begin? The first permanent English settlers arrived at Jamestown in 1607. The first slave ship landed at Point Comfort in 1619. The Pilgrims first set foot on Plymouth Rock in 1620. An unknown soldier fired the shot heard round the world in 1775. The Continental Congress approved the Declaration of Independence in 1776. In 1789, the Constitution became the law of the land. In 1865, Abraham Lincoln won the Civil War, and with it, a new birth of freedom. In 1964, Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, which the politically incorrect historian Christopher Caldwell has called America's second Constitution. For much of our history, Americans traced their roots to Plymouth rather than Jamestown, even though the Mayflower sailed more than a decade after the southern settlers reached Virginia. The Pilgrims' religious zeal, work ethic, and focus on the family better framed the national spirit than the all-male Jamestown settlers' hapless quest for wealth, which ended in starvation and even cannibalism before mail-order brides arrived to repopulate the colony. Many Americans find their founding in 1776, glossing over the century and a half of English settlement that preceded the signing of the Declaration. Now radicals have attempted to refound the founding in 1619, ignoring every virtue in American history to focus solely on the sin of slavery. Their first try failed on the facts, but in the long run, they may yet succeed, as fact succumbs to framing. Conservatives have attempted to refute the 1619 Project on almost exclusively factual grounds. Here again, they have refused to learn from their radical opponents, who understand that attitude trumps even facts in the narration of history. If conservatives will not listen to their opponents, they might at least read their own philosophers, such as Edmund Burke, who observed, "In history, a great volume is unrolled for our instruction, drawing the materials of future wisdom from the past errors and infirmities of mankind." All well and good, but what happens when ideologues abuse that great volume for their own political ends? It may, in the perversion, serve for a magazine, furnishing offensive and defensive weapons, and supplying the means of keeping alive or reviving dissensions and animosities, and adding fuel to civil fury, wrote Burke, whose comments could serve as a review of the 1619 Project. Facts matter, but the same set of facts can evoke any number of different attitudes. The radical activist Howard Zinn played fast and loose with the facts in his notorious polemic, A People's History of the United States. But his lies have caused less damage than his attitude, which recast America as a dark and devilish morass rather than a shining city upon a hill. He highlighted our nation's vices and ignored her virtues. According to Zinn, America exists authentically only in her sins. Two national narratives have emerged from this great unrolled volume of history. The conservative version affirms America's basic goodness and acknowledges her shortcomings with humility, both the national humility of our forefathers, who considered themselves sinners in the hands of an angry God, and also the personal humility expected of heirs to a great fortune given us by those selfsame forefathers. The politically correct history of the United States differs from the conservative version not so much in the facts it acknowledges as in its attitude toward the nation. The politically correct narrative approaches our national scandals with wrath and pride, delightedly condemning our ancestors and boasting of the radicals' own righteousness. Conservatives tend to arm themselves with facts in the battle against leftist feelings. Facts matter, but feelings dictate where those facts find themselves in the historical narrative. Political Political correctness shows us history through the lens of resentment, rewriting standards and speech codes for the benefit of allegedly aggrieved minority groups. But despite these proletarian pretensions, minorities themselves rarely promote PC. More often, white leftists feign indignation on behalf of the groups they believe ought to be offended. Howard Zinn was a straight white male. The same goes for Herbert Marcuse and even the swarthier Antonio Gramsci. The identitarian tenor of politically correct language in history would seem likely to divide Americans along racial and sexual lines, with ethnic minorities, women, and queers embracing PC and straight white males opposing it. Ryu Spaeth, for example, described the average anti-PC crusader in the New Republic as straight, white, male, conservative. But this picture, like political correctness itself, runs counter to reality. The majority of Americans hate political correctness, and minorities hate it most of all. According to Hidden Tribes, a study of America's polarized landscape by scholars Stephen Hawkins, Daniel Yudkin, Miriam Juan Torres, and Tim Dixon, a full 80% of Americans believe that political correctness is a problem in our country. Contrary to Spaeth's popular misconception, Hawkins and his colleagues found that whites are less likely than the average American to oppose political correctness. Asians, Hispanics, and American Indians all reject PC at higher rates than whites. These rates reach as high as 82% among Asians, 87% among Hispanics, and 88% among Indians. Feather, not dot, to use a politically incorrect distinction, while just 79% of whites take issue with the new lingo. Only blacks oppose PC at lower rates than whites, and still, 3/4 of black Americans consider political correctness a problem. Support for political correctness does not even break down as a battle between the old and the young. Respondents aged 24 to 29 have the greatest affection for PC, and still 74% of them dislike it. Political correctness is even less popular among those under the age of 24, 79% of whom oppose it. The radicals have not managed to win over a single age group, and they seem to have lost support between the millennial and Zoomer generations. Most people in every single allegedly oppressed group for whom the politically correct purport to speak oppose political correctness. Neither race, nor income, nor education, nor age significantly divides Americans on the issue. Instead, as the name would suggest, support for political correctness breaks down along political lines. All but 3% of devoted conservatives oppose political correctness. Most traditional liberals feel the same way. Political correctness enjoys majority support among just one group, progressive activists, a fact that undermines PC's pretensions to be the voice of oppressed minorities. Progressive activists are the whitest, richest, most highly educated group in the country. Political correctness masquerades as the cri de coeur of long-aggrieved racial and sexual minorities. In reality, Professor Jeffries' idiotic ramblings aside, white elites have always stood at the vanguard of political correctness. They set out to upend society from its most rarefied perch, the university campus. And in the 1980s, despite the movement's unpopularity, the campuses capitulated.
And that was Chapter 8, School of Resentment. And again, the issue here, and this is what conservatives and Republicans do on a regular basis, is they view events as discrete events, unattached to history. And in the case 1619 Project, the 1619 Project is part of a continuum, a historical and perhaps educational or intellectual continuum that started in the 70s when radicals decided and promoted the idea that history was not an accurate retelling of events, but it's simply political propaganda, and that their slogan was, history is written by the winners. And there was nobody to take them on that. Again, William F. Buckley Jr. sat around with his thumb up his butt, his brains in neutral, and allowed this to become a popular notion. That's how Howard Zinn became popular, and that's where the 1619 Project came from. Okay, is the idea that it's not, the point is for these people is not that they're trying to replace outright regular history. What they're trying to do is provide an alternative. They're telling students, you have a choice. You can believe the history that you read in other textbooks, or you can believe Howard Zinn, or you can believe the history that is currently popular, or you can believe the 1619 Project. The only way we're going to get rid of this notion is by insisting that history is accurate. And it's accurate because it is not told by the winners, it is told by historians who have a lot to lose by getting it wrong. Anyways, that was Speechless by Michael Knowles. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.